Every family has secrets, but mine turned our biggest celebration into a spectacle. My sister thought she could drag me through the mud in front of friends and strangers alike. She never expected I'd have the power to burn her world down with every eye in the room watching. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but I served mine at the altar, wrapped in white lace and witnessed by hundreds. This is how I finally made them see me, not as the invisible sister they could use and discard, but as the one who held all the cards. My name is Amelia Carson, and at 34, I've learned that family can be your greatest burden disguised as your greatest blessing. The chandelier crystals above me caught the late afternoon light streaming through the Belmont Hotel's floor-to-ceiling windows, casting rainbow fragments across the marble floor where I stood, invisible despite being in plain sight. Charleston's elite mingled around me at my sister's rehearsal dinner, their laughter echoing off the vaulted ceilings like a symphony I wasn't invited to join. I watched my mother, Elaine, glide through the crowd in her sapphire cocktail dress, her practiced smile never quite reaching her eyes when they landed on me. She had that way of looking through me, as if I were a piece of furniture that had been unfortunately placed in her line of sight. Tonight was no different. When Mrs. Whitmore asked about both her daughters, Mother's hand fluttered to her pearl necklace hertel when she was about to dismiss something unpleasant. "Oh, Amelia's here somewhere," she said, her tone suggesting I might as well have been the coat check girl. "You know how she is, always blending into the background. Not like our Sabrina, she just lights up every room, doesn't she?" The comparison hung in the air like expensive perfume, cloying and impossible to escape. I adjusted my simple navy dress, the one Sabrina had specifically requested I wear, because we wouldn't want you standing out in the photos, would we? And forced myself to take another sip of champagne that had long gone flat in my glass. Sabrina held court near the grand piano, her platinum blonde hair styled in waves that probably cost more than most people's rent. She threw her head back, laughing at something Colton's business partner had said, her diamond earrings catching the light. Even from across the room, I could see the calculating glint in her eyes as she cataloged every gift, every compliment, every advantage she could extract from the assembled guests. "Amelia," her voice cut through the crowd like a blade wrapped in silk. "Come here, darling sister. Everyone's dying to hear about your little job." The emphasis on little wasn't lost on me, nor on the circle of guests who turned to watch me approach. I walked over, my heels clicking against the marble with a steadiness I didn't feel. "Tell them about your work at what's it called again?" "Silverfish." Sabrina's smile was all teeth. "Silver Point Advisory," I corrected quietly. "We manage investment portfolios for—" "She helps rich people count their money," Sabrina interrupted, waving her manicured hand dismissively. "Though, ironically, she never seems to have any of her own. Remember last year when you had to borrow from me for Mom's birthday gift?" She turned to her audience with mock sympathy. "She's always been terrible with finances, despite her job. Isn't that just the most delicious irony?" The group tittered politely, their eyes sliding over me with a mixture of pity and second-hand embarrassment. What they didn't know, what Sabrina had conveniently rewritten in her version of history, was that she had borrowed $3,000 from me that month for her emergency cosmetic procedure. Money I'd never seen again. Colton appeared at Sabrina's elbow, his Brooks Brothers suit impeccable, his smile as manufactured as his fiancée's. Now, darling, be nice to your sister. She is helping with the wedding arrangements, after all." Helping? That's what they called it when I spent my evenings addressing invitations, organizing seating charts, and coordinating with vendors while Sabrina took credit for my work. When I'd suggested using my professional connections to negotiate better rates with suppliers, Sabrina had laughed and said, "Oh, Amelia, this isn't some discount wedding. We don't need your bargain hunting skills." As the evening wore on, I found myself relegated to the corner near the service entrance, watching the waitstaff move with more purpose and dignity than I'd been afforded all night. The familiar weight of resignation settled over my shoulders like a well-worn shawl. This was my role in the Carson family drama, the supporting character whose only purpose was to make the star shine brighter. But as I stood there, something shifted inside me. Maybe it was the way Sabrina's laugh grew shriller with each glass of champagne, or how Mother's friends whispered behind their hands whenever I passed. Or perhaps it was simply 34 years of accumulated slights finally reaching critical mass. Whatever it was, I felt the first crack in my carefully maintained composure. I wasn't going to be invisible anymore. Not after tonight. Not after what I'd discovered about Sabrina's wedding finances. The thought should have frightened me, but instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years' power. Setting down my glass with deliberate precision, I watched my reflection in the mirror behind the bar. The woman looking back at me wasn't the doormat they'd created. She was someone else entirely. Someone who was about to change everything. The weight of being the family scapegoat wasn't something that happened overnight. It was a slow erosion, like water wearing away stone, until you barely recognized the shape of who you used to be. As I stood in that glittering ballroom, memories flooded back unbidden, each one a small cut that had never quite healed. 3 years ago, Sabrina had come to my apartment at 11:30 p.m., mascara streaking down her cheeks, spinning a tale about a once-in-a-lifetime investment opportunity that would disappear by morning. She needed $15,000. It's for a boutique partnership. She'd sobbed into my shoulder. You know I'm good for it, Amelia. You're the only one who really understands me. I'd transferred the money at midnight, depleting my emergency fund. The boutique never materialized, and when I'd asked about repayment 6 months later, she'd laughed. Oh, that I thought that was a gift. You know, sister to sister. Besides, you make good money at that finance place. Then there was Mother's 60th birthday. I'd saved for months to buy her the vintage Cartier watch she'd admired in an antique shop window. But 2 days before the celebration, Sabrina had called, breathless with panic. The party venue wants their deposit now or they'll cancel. I'm maxed out from all the planning. Can you cover it? Just temporarily. $8,000, temporarily. At the party, Sabrina had presented the watch my watch while I'd handed over a gift card, enduring Mother's barely concealed disappointment. How thoughtful, she'd said, her tone suggesting it was anything but. The family dinners were their own form of torture. Every Sunday at Mother's colonial house in Mount Pleasant, I'd sit at the same table where my achievements were minimized and my failures magnified. When I'd earned my Series 7 license, Mother had merely nodded, then spent 20 minutes praising Sabrina's new yoga certification. When I'd been promoted to senior financial advisor at Silver Point, managing portfolios worth millions, the family's response was to ask if I could finally afford to dress better. Remember when Amelia tried to give us investment advice? Sabrina had laughed at last Thanksgiving, gesturing with her wine glass. She wanted us to put money in some boring index funds. Thank God Daddy didn't listen before he passed. Can you imagine he'd have been mortified to have such pedestrian investments? What she'd conveniently forgotten was that those boring index funds had outperformed Father's risky ventures by 30%. His portfolio had hemorrhaged money in his final years, chasing get-rich-quick schemes that Sabrina had often championed. After his death, I'd quietly restructured what was left, saving Mother's retirement, though she never knew it was me who'd prevented financial disaster. The requests for money were constant, always framed as family obligations. Mother's property taxes just until my investments mature. Sabrina's car repairs, you know I'm between jobs. Cousin Janet's son's tuition, family helps family. Each time, I paid, and each time, my generosity was met with criticism. Too slow to offer, too small an amount, too many questions asked. At work, I was respected. My clients trusted me with their life savings, their children's college funds, their retirement dreams. I'd built a reputation for turning around failing portfolios, for seeing market trends others missed, for protecting wealth through economic downturns. The irony wasn't lost on me. Strangers valued my expertise while my own family treated me like a walking ATM with bad fashion sense. The breaking point should have come when Sabrina had used my social security number to apply for a store credit card, maxing it out within a week. When I'd discovered it during a routine credit check, she'd cried, promised it was a mistake, begged me not to tell Mother. It would kill her, she'd said. You know how she is about family reputation. So I'd paid it off, had it removed from my credit report, and said nothing. The next week, Sabrina told everyone at Sunday dinner how I'd been so paranoid about identity theft lately, it's almost sad how anxious she gets about money. But I hadn't broken. Not then. I'd absorbed it all, year after year, telling myself this was what family did. This was love, wasn't it? This constant emptying of myself to fill others' needs, standing in that rehearsal dinner, watching Sabrina perform for her audience. I finally understood the truth. This wasn't love. This was carefully orchestrated exploitation, and I'd been the perfect victim, reliable, quiet, always there with an open checkbook and closed mouth. My phone buzzed in my purse, a notification from my banking app, another large transaction alert, but this time, it wasn't my money being spent. This time, I'd been watching Sabrina's financial footprints, and what I'd discovered would change everything. She thought she was so clever, but she'd forgotten one crucial detail. I wasn't just the family doormat. I was a financial advisor with access to systems and knowledge she couldn't even imagine. The woman who'd endured years of humiliation was gone. In her place stood someone who understood that sometimes the best revenge isn't served cold, it's served with perfect timing and irrefutable documentation. The Magnolia Ballroom at the Charleston Harbor Resort had been transformed into what Sabrina called Southern elegance meets modern luxury. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling like frozen champagne, and thousands of white roses lined the aisle where my sister would soon glide toward her future. I stood in the preparation suite at 7:15 a.m., steam from the garment bags fogging the mirrors, watching the circus of wedding preparation unfold. "Amelia, for God's sake, stop standing there like a statue!" Sabrina snapped, her hair in rollers, face half made. "Make yourself useful. Check that the centerpieces match the photo I sent, and make sure the caterers know about Mrs. Hayes's gluten allergy that's Colton's mother, in case you've forgotten." I hadn't forgotten. I'd been the one to discover the allergy in the first place, after hours of coordination calls that Sabrina couldn't be bothered to make. But pointing that out would only trigger another tantrum, and we had 8 hours until showtime. The wedding coordinator, a bird-like woman named Patricia, fluttered between stations with her clipboard, occasionally shooting me sympathetic glances. She'd learned quickly that I was the only one who actually answered questions and solved problems, while Sabrina preferred to create them. "The string quartet needs to know the processional timing," Patricia whispered to me while Sabrina was distracted by her makeup artist. 3 minutes for the bridesmaids. Pause for effect, then 4 minutes for the bride. I replied, "I emailed you the marked score yesterday." During the first rehearsal 2 days ago, Sabrina had assigned me a special role. "You'll be the coordinator's assistant," she'd announced to the wedding party, her tone suggesting she was doing me a favor. "You'll make sure everyone's in place, handle any little emergencies. You know, behind-the-scenes stuff. That's more your speed anyway, isn't it?" The bridesmaids, Sabrina's sorority sisters, and Colton's sister had exchanged glances. One of them, a redhead named Madison, had actually looked uncomfortable. "Shouldn't Amelia be in the wedding party? She's your sister?" Sabrina's laugh had tinkled like breaking glass. "Oh, Amelia doesn't like being in photos. She's camera shy. Aren't you?" Melly Melly, the childhood nickname she only used when she wanted to diminish me. I'd smiled and nodded, playing my part, even as Colton had frowned slightly, perhaps sensing something off in the dynamics but choosing not to probe. Now, as the morning progressed, I moved through my assigned tasks with mechanical precision. Check the guest list, confirm the van schedule for elderly relatives, ensure the champagne was properly chilled, all while Sabrina held court in the bridal suite, her voice carrying through the walls. "Can you believe Amelia wanted to give a speech, she was saying to her bridesmaids. I told her we're keeping toasts to the wedding party only. She looked so crushed it was actually kind of sad. But honestly, what would she even say? Hi, I'm Amelia. I balance spreadsheets. The laughter that followed was sharp enough to cut, but I felt nothing. I'd moved past hurt into something colder, more calculated. Every insult was just another nail in the coffin of our relationship, one I was about to bury publicly. At noon, I watched Colton and his groomsmen take photos by the harbor. He was handsome in that prep school way. Strong jaw, perfect teeth, the kind of confidence that came from never having to question your place in the world. His family owned a chain of luxury car dealerships across the Southeast, and he'd just launched his own tech startup. A catch, by any standard. I wondered how he'd react when he learned the truth about his bride. Amelia. Mother's voice cut through my thoughts. She stood in the doorway, resplendent in champagne silk, her expression sour. Where's Sabrina's something borrowed? She's having a fit. The something borrowed a vintage diamond bracelet from our grandmother was exactly where I'd placed it 3 hours ago, in the blue Tiffany box on the vanity. But Sabrina had moved it, forgotten where, and now it was somehow my fault. I found it under a pile of makeup brushes and delivered it to the bride, who snatched it without thanks. And make sure the photographer knows I want mostly right-side profiles, she commanded. My left side photographs heavy. By 4 p.m., guests were arriving. 200 of Charleston's finest, plus Colton's business associates from Atlanta, plus family from both sides. I recognized several of my own clients among them, people who trusted me with millions but would only know me today as the sister who's not in the wedding party. Standing in the back of the preparation area, I pulled out my phone and reviewed the documents one more time. Bank statements, loan applications, forged signatures, all meticulously organized in a folder marked insurance, because that's what this was, insurance that after today, I'd never have to endure another moment of being the family doormat. Patricia appeared at my elbow, frazzled. The minister wants to know if there are any special readings. 1 Corinthians chapter 13, I said. Love is patient. Love is kind. The irony of it almost made me smile. Sabrina specifically requested it. As the clock ticked toward 5:30 p.m., toward the moment when 200 guests would witness the union of Colton Hayes and Sabrina Carson, I felt a strange calm descend. The stage was set, the players were in position, and I, the invisible sister, the family ATM, the perpetual disappointment, was about to give the performance of my lifetime. The rehearsal dinner the night before the wedding should have been a warning. Looking back, it was the moment everything crystallized, when 34 years of swallowed pride finally turned to poison in my throat. The private dining room at the Ocean Room glowed with candlelight, the tables draped in ivory linen and scattered with gardenia petals. I'd arrived early to check the seating arrangements, another invisible task assigned to me when I overheard Sabrina talking to her maid of honor near the bar. God, I can't wait until this is over and I don't have to pretend Amelia's helpful anymore, she was saying, not bothering to lower her voice. Colton keeps asking why she's not in the wedding party. What am I supposed to say, that my sister's such a loser, she'd make our photos look like a charity case? I stood frozen behind a potted palm, my hands gripping the seating chart so tightly the paper crinkled. That's harsh, Sab, her friend had replied, though her tone suggested amusement rather than reproach. Is it? Though, look at her. 34, single, boring job, no social life. She's like a cautionary tale. The only reason she's even useful is because she'll write a check whenever Mom guilt-trips her about family obligations. They'd moved away then, leaving me standing in the shadow of that artificial tree, trembling with something that wasn't quite rage, not yet. It was deeper than that, more primal, the feeling of prey suddenly realizing it has teeth. The dinner began at 7 p.m. sharp. I was seated at table 3, with distant cousins and family friends who couldn't quite place me. "You're Elaine's other daughter," one of them had asked, as if I were a rumor that needed confirming. The toasts began after the salad course. Colton's father spoke about legacy and family values. Mother dabbed her eyes, talking about her beautiful daughter in the singular, as if she'd only ever had one. The best man told embarrassing stories about Colton's college years that had everyone roaring with laughter. Then Sabrina stood up, champagne flute in hand, her smile luminous in the candlelight. "I want to thank everyone for being here," she began, her voice honeyed with false emotion. "Especially my family, who've supported me through everything." Her eyes found mine across the room. "And I want to particularly thank my sister Amelia." My heart stopped. For one naive second, I thought perhaps she's been so generous with her. "Assistance," Sabrina continued, her pause before assistance loaded with meaning. "You know, Amelia's always been the practical one. While I was pursuing my passions, she was, well, pursuing spreadsheets." Gentle laughter rippled through the room. "But that's what family's for, right? We all have our roles to play. Some of us are meant to shine." She gestured to herself with false modesty. "And some are meant to support from the shadows. And Amelia, you've always been so good at being supportive, even when you couldn't afford it." The laughter was louder this time, though I caught a few uncomfortable glances. My face burned, but I kept my expression neutral, even managed a tight smile. "Remember last year?" Sabrina continued, clearly enjoying herself. "When Amelia tried to give me financial advice, she was so serious, with her little calculator and everything, telling me I was over-leveraged or something. Meanwhile, she was begging Mom for help with her rent. That was a lie, a complete fabrication. I'd never asked Mother for rent money. I'd been paying portions of Mother's mortgage for 3 years, but the room didn't know that. They only saw what Sabrina wanted them to see, the successful daughter and the failure. But honestly," Sabrina raised her glass higher, "what would we do without our Amelia? Someone has to handle the boring stuff so the rest of us can live our lives. To Amelia, the most reliable calculator in the family." The toast was met with awkward applause. I raised my water glass. I'd stopped drinking an hour ago, needing my mind clear, and smiled. It was the smile of someone who'd just made a decision. Colton had looked uncomfortable during the speech, his eyes finding mine with something like apology. His mother had actually frowned, but Sabrina was oblivious, drunk on her own cruelty and the champagne, basking in what she thought was her moment of triumph. After dinner, as guests mingled over dessert and coffee, I stepped out onto the terrace. The harbor stretched out before me, lights from boats flickering like fallen stars on the black water. The salt air filled my lungs, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could truly breathe. That was uncalled for. I turned to find Colton's sister, Victoria, standing in the doorway. She was a lawyer, sharp-eyed and direct, nothing like the other bridesmaids. "It's fine," I said automatically. "No, it's not." She moved to stand beside me at the railing. "I've seen how you handle everything, how you're the only one who actually gets things done. Sabrina's lucky to have you." "Sabrina's never felt lucky about anything concerning me." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "You know, in my experience, people who punch down are usually hiding something. The harder they punch, the bigger the secret." She went back inside, leaving me alone with the harbor and my thoughts. She had no idea how right she was. Sabrina was hiding something, something that would destroy her carefully constructed image, her wedding, her future, and tomorrow, at 5:45 p.m., in front of 200 guests. I was going to expose it all. The breaking point had passed. I was already broken. What stood on that terrace was something else entirely, something reconstructed from the pieces, harder and sharper than before. Tomorrow, Sabrina would learn that the boring sister with the calculator had been keeping track of more than just numbers. She'd been keeping score. The discovery had been accidental, the way most devastating truths are. 3 weeks before the wedding, I'd been reviewing my credit report for a mortgage pre-approval when I noticed an inquiry I hadn't authorized. Trident Financial Services, a company I'd never heard of. My blood had run cold. Identity theft was every financial advisor's nightmare. But when I'd investigated further, what I found wasn't simple theft. It was far more calculated, far more personal. The loan application was for $75,000, using my Social Security number, my employment history, but with one crucial difference: the signature. I knew that signature. I'd seen it on birthday cards, on the thank you note for the Christmas gift I'd bought her last year, on the receipt for the designer shoes she'd charged to my credit card by mistake. Sabrina. At first, I'd thought it must be an error. Surely my sister couldn't have done something this monumentally illegal. But as I dug deeper, using my professional access to financial databases and my connections in the banking industry, the full picture emerged like a photograph developing in slow motion. 3 loans, totaling $190,000, all taken out in the past 8 months. All using variations of my information, sometimes my Social Security number with her name, sometimes her information with my credit history attached. The money had been funneled through a series of accounts, but I'd tracked it, transaction by transaction, to its final destination: wedding vendors. The Magnolia Ballroom rental, $30,000. The designer wedding dress, $15,000. The flowers that would fill the venue, $12,000. The 7-tier cake flown in from that celebrity baker in New York, $8,000. Every lavish detail of tomorrow's spectacle had been paid for with fraud. I'd printed everything: bank statements, loan documents, application forms. I'd even found the email trail where Sabrina had corresponded with someone who specialized in credit repair and enhancement, a euphemism for document forgery. The most damning piece was a text message screenshot I'd recovered from a backed-up phone sync, where she'd told Madison, "Don't worry about the wedding costs. Amelia's credit is finally useful for something. She'll never even know." But I did know. And I'd spent the past 3 weeks preparing my response with the same meticulous attention to detail I applied to my clients' portfolios. I'd consulted with a lawyer quietly, carefully, to understand my options. Criminal charges would have been easy to file. One phone call to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division and Sabrina would be facing federal fraud charges. But that felt too distant, too impersonal. Sabrina wouldn't just lose her freedom, she'd lose it in private, behind closed doors, with plea deals and lawyers spinning the narrative. No, she'd humiliated me publicly for years. Her reckoning would be equally public. I'd made copies of everything, organized into a leather portfolio that now sat in my apartment safe. But I'd also prepared something special for tomorrow: a single-page summary, beautifully formatted, that laid out the truth in devastating simplicity. Loan amounts, dates, forged signatures, and at the bottom, a QR code that linked to a cloud folder containing all the evidence, accessible to anyone with a smartphone. The brilliant part, if I could call my own plan brilliant, was that Sabrina had no idea I knew. She'd been so confident in my ignorance, so certain that boring, predictable Amelia would never check, never question, never fight back. Even if the loans eventually showed up on my credit report, she probably figured I'd just pay them off like I'd paid off everything else. Too embarrassed to make a scene. Standing in my apartment at 11:45 p.m., the night before the wedding, I looked at the bridesmaid dress Sabrina had originally picked out for me before deciding I wasn't worthy of being in her wedding party. It was hideous, a mustard yellow that would have washed out my complexion entirely. She'd chosen it specifically to make me look bad, then changed her mind and decided having me in the background was even better. My phone buzzed. A text from Patricia, the wedding coordinator. "All set for tomorrow. Thanks for your help with everything. The bride is lucky to have a sister like you." Lucky. I almost laughed. I opened my laptop and logged into my bank account, checking one more time. Yes, there it was. Another inquiry from a lender. Just this afternoon. Sabrina was still at it, even hours before her wedding, trying to squeeze just a little more out of my stolen identity. This time for a credit card with a $20,000 limit. The arrogance of it was breathtaking. I closed the laptop and picked up the folder I'd prepared for tomorrow. Inside, along with the summary page, was a letter I'd written to Colton. Not a long one, just enough to apologize for what he was about to learn and to assure him that I'd never held him responsible for Sabrina's actions. He seemed like a decent man. He deserved better than finding out his bride was a criminal. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight. I sat in my modest apartment, the one Sabrina mocked for being so basic, and felt the kind of calm that comes from knowing exactly what's about to happen. For once in my life, I held all the cards, and tomorrow, at the perfect moment, I was going to play them. The wedding would be beautiful, right up until it wasn't. The wedding day arrived wrapped in perfect Charleston weather, clear skies, a gentle breeze off the harbor, the kind of day that seemed crafted specifically for outdoor photographs. I arrived at the venue at 1 p.m., my navy dress pressed, my hair pulled back in a simple chignon, the leather portfolio tucked safely in my car's trunk. The Magnolia Ballroom had been transformed overnight into Sabrina's vision of paradise. White roses and peonies cascaded from every surface, their perfume so thick it was almost suffocating. Crystal chandeliers had been brought in specifically for the occasion, each one catching the afternoon light that streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The harbor stretched beyond, boats bobbing lazily in the distance, providing the perfect backdrop for what Charleston society would later call the wedding of the season, though not for the reasons anyone expected. "Amelia, thank God!" Patricia rushed over, her clipboard clutched to her chest. "The string quartet needs to know where to position themselves for the cocktail hour, and the caterers have a question about the champagne service." I handled each crisis with practiced efficiency, moving through the preparation areas like a ghost. In the bridal suite, Sabrina held court, her hair in an elaborate updo that had taken 3 hours to perfect, her makeup applied with artistic precision, the dress, that $15,000 confection of silk and Swarovski crystals, hung waiting, a monument to excess funded by fraud. "Is everything ready?" Sabrina demanded when she saw me, not bothering with a greeting. "Everything's perfect," I assured her. And for once, I wasn't lying. Mother swept in at 3:30 p.m., resplendent in rose gold, her face glowing with maternal pride for one daughter. Anyway, she barely glanced at me before focusing on Sabrina. "You look radiant, darling. This is going to be the most beautiful wedding Charleston has ever seen." The photographer, an energetic man named Antonio, began arranging the bridal party for photos. I stood to the side, occasionally called upon to hold a lipstick or adjust a train, but otherwise invisible. In one particularly ironic moment, Sabrina insisted I take a photo of her with her bridesmaids on her phone. "Make sure you get the harbor in the background," she instructed, "and try not to cut off anyone's heads like you did at Christmas." I'd never taken a bad photo in my life, but I obliged, capturing her surrounded by her chosen sisters while her actual sister remained behind the lens. By 5 p.m., guests were arriving in earnest. I recognized many faces: Mother's book club, Father's old business partners, Sabrina's sorority sisters, Colton's tech industry colleagues. Several of my own clients were among them, people who managed millions through my guidance but knew me here only as the helpful sister in navy blue. I watched Colton take his place at the altar, his groomsmen flanking him like a row of matching penguins. He looked nervous but happy, straightening his bow tie repeatedly, his eyes fixed on the door where Sabrina would soon appear. My stomach twisted not with nervousness, but with something almost like pity. In 45 minutes, his life would shatter as publicly as mine had been chipped away privately for years. The string quartet began the processional at 5:20 p.m. The bridesmaids glided down the aisle in their seafoam green dresses, each carrying bouquets of white roses tied with silver ribbon. The flower girl scattered petals with serious concentration. The ring-bearer, Colton's nephew, managed not to drop the cushion. Then the music changed to Pachelbel's Canon, and the room rose to its feet. The doors opened, and there was Sabrina, radiant on our Uncle Richard's arm he'd stepped in after Father's death, her dress catching the light like captured starlight. The collective intake of breath from the assembled guests was audible. She was, I had to admit, breathtakingly beautiful. As she passed my row, I was seated behind Mother. In the second tier of family importance, our eyes met for just a moment. Her expression was triumphant, the look of someone who believed she'd won everything. She had no idea that her victory march was actually a walk to the scaffold. The ceremony began with the traditional welcomes and prayers. The minister, a family friend who'd known us since childhood, spoke about the sanctity of marriage, about trust and honesty as the foundations of a lasting union. The irony was not lost on me. Marriage, he intoned, is built on truth, for what foundation can last when built on deception? Sabrina smiled serenely, her hand in Colton's, playing the part of the Blessed Bride perfectly. The guests watched with rapt attention, some dabbing at their eyes. Mother was already crying, her handkerchief pressed delicately to her cheek. As the minister moved toward the vows, my hand moved to my purse, fingers brushing against the folded paper inside. The QR code I'd generated was active, the cloud folder accessible, the evidence waiting. All that remained was the timing. The minister asked if anyone knew of any reason why these two should not be joined in matrimony. The traditional pause, the moment everyone expected to pass in silence. I stood up. The rustle of my movement seemed thunderous in the quiet room. 200 heads turned to look at me, including Sabrina's, her expression shifting from confusion to alarm. "I'm so sorry," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the ballroom. "But there's something everyone needs to know before this goes any further." The silence that followed my standing was absolute, the kind that makes your ears ring with its intensity. 200 faces turned toward me, a sea of shock and confusion. Sabrina's bouquet trembled in her hands, her carefully applied makeup unable to hide the color draining from her face. "Amelia," Mother hissed from the front row, "sit down this instant." But I was already walking toward the altar, my heels clicking against the marble floor with metronomic precision. Each step felt like shedding a layer of the person they'd forced me to be. The invisible sister, the family ATM, the reliable disappointment. "I apologize for the disruption," I said, addressing the room but keeping my eyes on Sabrina. "But everyone here deserves to know what they're really celebrating." Colton stepped forward, his expression concerned rather than angry. "Amelia, what's going on?" I pulled the paper from my purse, unfolding it with deliberate slowness. 3 months ago, Sabrina took out a loan for $75,000. The interesting part, she used my Social Security number to do it. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Sabrina's bridesmaids exchanged horrified glances. The photographer, still recording, lowered his camera slightly before raising it again. This was now a different kind of moment to capture. "That's ridiculous!" Sabrina's voice cracked. "Amelia's having some kind of breakdown. She's always been jealous." "The loan from Trident Financial Services," I continued, my voice steady as I read from the page. "Application submitted January 15th at 2:43 p.m. $75,000. Then another from Cascade Lending on February 3rd, $60,000. And finally, First Harbor Credit Union, February 28th, $55,000. The math was easy enough for everyone to do. $190,000. Every vendor for this wedding, I gestured to the opulent surroundings, was paid with money obtained through identity theft. The flowers, the venue, that beautiful dress, all of it funded by fraud committed against me, her own sister. "You're lying," Sabrina shrieked, her composure finally cracking. "You've always been a pathetic, jealous—" "I have the documents," I interrupted, holding up my phone. "Bank statements, loan applications with forged signatures, even the emails where you discussed with your credit specialist how to use my information without getting caught. There's a QR code here." I held up the paper, "that links to everything. Anyone with a phone can verify what I'm saying." The room erupted. Phones appeared in hands like magic. Guests scanning the code, their faces shifting from skepticism to horror as they scrolled through the evidence. Colton's mother covered her mouth with her hand. The minister stepped back, as if fraud might be contagious. Colton stood frozen, looking between Sabrina and me. "Sabrina, tell me this isn't true." "It's not, she doesn't understand." Sabrina was scrambling now, her train tangling around her feet as she turned to face him. "Amelia said I could use her credit. She offered. She's twisting everything." "I have the text message," I said quietly, but my voice carried. "Where you told Madison, and I quote, 'Amelia's credit is finally useful for something. She'll never even know.'" Madison, among the bridesmaids, went pale. Several people who'd been recording the ceremony were now recording this. Charleston society would be dining out on this scandal for years. Mother had risen from her seat, her face a mask of fury, but at whom? I couldn't tell. "Amelia, we can discuss this privately." Like we discussed Sabrina using my credit card without permission, or the $15,000 she borrowed for an investment that never existed, or the $8,000 for your birthday party that she took credit for. I turned to address the room. For years, I've been silent while my family treated me like a convenient bank account with no feelings. But federal fraud is where I draw the line. Federal fraud. Colton's father, a corporate lawyer, stood up sharply. "So, this is a federal crime we're talking about. Identity theft across state lines, fraudulent loan applications, forgery." I listed, "Yes, these are federal crimes." Sabrina's legs seemed to give out. She sank onto the altar steps, her dress pooling around her like spilled milk. "Amelia, please." "You stood at that rehearsal dinner," I said, my voice finally showing emotion, "and mocked me for being boring, for being practical, for being everything you thought was beneath you. You said I was only good for handling the boring stuff so the rest of us can live our lives." "Well, congratulations. Sabrina, the boring stuff just ended your life as you know it." Colton had backed away from Sabrina, his face a mixture of disgust and disbelief. "The prenup," he said suddenly. "The prenup has a fraud clause. Any criminal deception voids it entirely." His father nodded grimly. "We'll be filing for annulment immediately." "But we're not even married yet," Sabrina wailed. "And now you never will be," Colton said coldly. "At least, not to me." The room was in complete chaos. Guests were standing, talking in heated whispers, some already heading for the exits. The photographer was still shooting, documenting the collapse of what was supposed to be the event of the season. The string quartet had long since stopped playing, the musicians watching with the same shocked fascination as everyone else. Victoria, Colton's sister, actually applauded slowly, 3 times, before her mother yanked her hand down. I turned to look at Sabrina one last time. She sat in her fraudulently funded designer dress, mascara running in black rivers down her cheeks, surrounded by the wreckage of her own making. "You wanted me invisible, Sabrina," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Tonight, everyone sees the truth." The walk from the altar to the ballroom doors felt like 1,000 miles and an instant simultaneously. I moved through the chaos with deliberate calm, my navy dress unremarkable among the designer gowns, my simple chignon already forgotten while Sabrina's elaborate updo wilted with her tears. Behind me, the implosion continued, voices raised, accusations flying, the careful social fabric of Charleston's elite tearing at the seams. Mother caught my arm as I passed her row. "How could you do this to your sister, to our family?" I looked at her, really looked at her, for perhaps the first time as an equal rather than a disappointing daughter. "I didn't do anything to anyone. Mother. I simply stopped letting things be done to me." Her grip loosened, and I pulled free, continuing my walk. Each step felt lighter than the last, as if I was shedding years of accumulated weight, every snide comment, every borrowed dollar never returned, every moment I'd been made to feel less than. The late evening sun was painting the harbor gold as I pushed through the ballroom doors. Behind me, I could hear Colton's voice, cold and legal. I want every gift returned, every penny accounted for, and if a single fraudulent charge appears on any account connected to me, the doors swung shut, cutting off his words. In the parking lot, valets scrambled to retrieve cars for fleeing guests. Some stood in clusters, phones out, no doubt sharing the scandal across social media. By tomorrow, perhaps by tonight, the story would be everywhere. The Carson family name, which Mother guarded so jealously, would be synonymous with fraud and public humiliation. I found my car, a sensible Honda that Sabrina had mocked countless times, and slid behind the wheel. Through the rearview mirror, I watched as more guests flooded out of the venue. Some looked shocked, others almost gleeful at witnessing such spectacular drama. A few caught my eye and quickly looked away, as if my rebellion might be contagious. My phone buzzed incessantly, texts, calls, notifications. I turned it off without looking. Tomorrow would bring lawyers, police statements, and the long process of untangling Sabrina's financial crimes. But tonight, for the first time in my adult life, I was truly free. I drove to my apartment, the one Sabrina had called depressing and where ambition goes to die. But as I climbed the stairs to my door, I saw it differently. This was my space, paid for with my earned money, decorated with my choices. No one here would mock my book collection or sneer at my practical furniture. No one would treat my home like an ATM or my dignity like collateral damage. Inside, I poured myself a glass of wine, the good bottle I'd been saving for a special occasion. If destroying my sister's wedding in front of Charleston society didn't qualify, nothing would. I stood at my window, looking out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the growing darkness. Somewhere out there, Sabrina was probably in hysterics. Mother was certainly crafting damage control strategies, and Colton was likely consulting with his lawyers. The photographer was probably already selling his footage to the highest bidder. The guests were turning my family's destruction into tomorrow's brunch conversation, and I felt nothing. No guilt, no regret, no savage joy. Just a cool, clean emptiness where years of resentment had lived. It was over. The role I'd been forced to play, the family doormat, the convenient scapegoat, the invisible sister, had been publicly and irrevocably burned to ash. My reflection in the window showed a woman I barely recognized. Not because she looked different, same practical hairstyle, same simple dress, same understated makeup, but because she stood differently, straighter, stronger, visible. Tomorrow, I'd have to deal with the aftermath, the legal proceedings, the family fallout, the social consequences. My professional reputation might take a hit, though my clients would probably respect someone who stood up against fraud, even especially when it was family. But those were tomorrow's concerns. Tonight, I sat in my modest apartment, sipping excellent wine, and savored the silence. No more demands for money. No more casual cruelties disguised as jokes. No more being grateful for scraps of acknowledgement from people who should have loved me. Sabrina had been right about one thing at the rehearsal dinner we all had our roles to play. She'd cast herself as the star and me as the supporting character whose only purpose was to make her shine brighter. But she'd forgotten something crucial about supporting characters. They're often the ones who know all the secrets. And sometimes, when pushed too far, they stop supporting and start telling the truth. The wedding had been everything Sabrina dreamed of, unforgettable, talked about for years to come, with her at the absolute center of attention, just not quite in the way she'd planned. I raised my glass to the window, to my reflection, to the woman who'd finally decided she was worth more than they'd ever bothered to see. "You wanted me invisible, Sabrina," I repeated to the empty room, to the night, to myself. But invisibility was never my burden, it was my weapon. And tonight, everyone finally saw the truth. The city lights blurred and sparkled through my wine glass, and for the first time in 34 years, I felt exactly where I was supposed to be, alone, unburdened, and finally, brilliantly visible. Thank you for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts below. Sometimes the most powerful moment isn't when we forgive, but when we finally choose ourselves.